A young, ambitious film student stepped up to challenge Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood, expecting to humiliate him in front of a live audience. But instead of a viral takedown, he got a masterclass in experience, resilience, and real storytelling. This is a lesson in why wisdom outlasts arrogance, and why tearing something down is never as powerful as building something real. The auditorium at Silverman Film Academy buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and quiet skepticism. Students, professors, and industry professionals filled the seats, eager to hear from Clint Eastwood, the legendary filmmaker whose name had become synonymous with Hollywood's golden age and its ability to endure. At 94 years old, Eastwood was more than just a director. He was a living testament to the evolution of cinema. His career had spanned decades of groundbreaking films, iconic performances, and a directorial style that rejected fleeting trends in favor of timeless storytelling. Some attendees admired him, seeing him as a master of his craft, an artist who had weathered Hollywood's constant reinvention and still stood tall. Others, particularly the younger generation, weren't so sure. Among them sat Noah Parker, an outspoken film student whose progressive critiques of old Hollywood had earned him a small but loyal online following. To him, Eastwood wasn't just an industry giant, he was a symbol of a fading era. Noah believed the film industry was moving forward, leaving behind the old ideas, structures, and voices that had dominated the past. To him, Eastwood represented everything that needed to be challenged. This wasn't just a learning opportunity for Noah, it was an opportunity to prove himself. He had studied Eastwood's films, dissected his interviews, and prepared his argument carefully. He wasn't here to listen, he was here to question, to disrupt, to force a moment that would make waves beyond this auditorium. As the panelists took their seats on stage, Noah leaned forward, eyes locked on Eastwood. His mind was already rehearsing his challenge, his moment. This wasn't just a discussion, it was a confrontation, and if everything went according to plan, tonight would be the night Noah Parker made a name for himself. The panel discussion started smoothly, with Dr. Evelyn Carter, a respected film professor, guiding the conversation. She praised Clint Eastwood's legacy, highlighting his ability to adapt across decades of changing cinema. Eastwood, as always, remained calm and measured, sharing insights about storytelling, the importance of resilience, and the way technology had transformed filmmaking. He spoke not as a man clinging to the past, but as someone who had lived through Hollywood's greatest shifts and still thrived. That's when Noah Parker saw his opportunity. He raised his hand, standing up with an air of calculated confidence. Dr. Carter nodded in his direction, and with a smirk he spoke. "Mr. Eastwood, you've had an impressive career, but let's be honest. Do you think filmmakers like you still have a place in Hollywood today?" The room stirred. A few students exchanged glances. The question was pointed, deliberate, the kind that demanded controversy. Noah didn't stop there. "Cinema is evolving," he continued, his voice growing bolder. "The old ways of storytelling, the outdated masculinity, the conservative themes, they don't resonate with today's audiences. Many people feel it's time for Hollywood to move forward, leaving the past behind. Would you say you're out of touch?" A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Eastwood. Some students nodded, silently agreeing with Noah's challenge. Others shifted in their seats, sensing an impending confrontation. This was it, the moment Noah had been waiting for. In his mind, he had already envisioned the headline, "Young filmmaker takes down Hollywood legend." But what Noah didn't realize, what he never saw coming, was that Clint Eastwood had faced tougher opponents than a film student with a microphone, and he was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Clint Eastwood didn't flinch. He didn't scoff, didn't frown, didn't even shift in his chair. Instead, he simply let the silence stretch, allowing Noah Parker's challenge to hang in the air, giving the young man just enough time to question whether he had made the right move. Then, with the same deliberate patience that had made him an icon on screen, Eastwood exhaled slowly, took a sip from the water bottle in front of him, and finally spoke. "You rehearsed that one, didn't you?" A ripple of quiet chuckles spread through the auditorium. It wasn't a direct rebuttal, but something in his tone, calm, amused, completely unbothered, made it clear that Noah's attempt to rattle him had already failed. Noah stiffened, his smirk fading slightly. "I'm just asking what a lot of people are thinking," he countered, trying to reclaim control. Eastwood tilted his head slightly, studying him the way a seasoned gunfighter might size up a nervous opponent in an old western. "A lot of people," he repeated, as if tasting the words. "Or just you?" Noah blinked. That wasn't in the script he had written in his head. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice steady and unhurried. "You think the world just moves forward because some kid with a camera says so? That change happens because someone like you points a finger and says, 'That's old, throw it out.'" Noah opened his mouth to reply, but Eastwood didn't give him the chance. "Let me tell you something, kid." His voice was firm but not harsh, the same tone that had delivered unforgettable lines in 100 films. "You don't erase the past just because you don't like it. You learn from it, you build on it, you take what worked, fix what didn't, and move forward. That's progress, not whatever the hell this is." He mimicked Noah's earlier dismissive hand gesture, and this time the laughter was louder. A few students in the audience even clapped. Noah's jaw tightened, but his confidence had taken a hit. He had walked into this expecting to control the conversation, to put Clint Eastwood on the defensive. But now, standing under the weight of the legend's words, he felt something he hadn't anticipated. Doubt. And Clint Eastwood? He was just getting started. Noah Parker refused to back down. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced a smirk, straightening his posture as if sheer confidence could tilt the momentum back in his favor. He could feel the weight of the room shifting. His supporters weren't nodding as enthusiastically as before. He had to regain control. "With all due respect, Mr. Eastwood," he began again, this time tightening his voice just enough to hide his nerves. "It's easy for you to talk about learning from the past when you were part of a generation that had it easier. Hollywood back then wasn't exactly inclusive. Maybe the reason filmmakers like you are being left behind is that audiences today want something new, something better." A low murmur ran through the auditorium. Some students exchanged glances. It was a bold statement, but was it true? Even those who initially supported Noah seemed hesitant now, uncertain if his words held real weight. Eastwood chuckled, not in amusement but in mild disappointment. He shook his head slowly. "Easier?" he repeated, as if the very notion was ridiculous. Then, in that same gravelly, measured voice that had commanded movie screens for decades, he leaned in slightly. "Kid, I started in Hollywood when they told actors like me to change their names because they sounded too rough. You ever shovel asphalt in the middle of summer just to afford a meal? You ever sleep in your car between auditions because rent was too high? That was my easy path." Noah froze, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Eastwood wasn't finished. "I've seen guys like you before, looking for a sound bite, hoping to make a scene." He took another sip of water, allowing the moment to stretch, before delivering the final blow. "But here's the thing. You walked in here thinking I was going to fold, that I'd get mad, stumble over my words, maybe even storm off. But I don't do performances on command. That's your job." The laughter this time was louder, sharper, more decisive. A few students actually clapped. Noah felt it now. The shift. The audience wasn't on his side anymore. He had assumed they would be, that they would cheer for him as he took down an aging Hollywood relic. But now, as he stood there, facing a man who had seen and survived more than he could comprehend, he realized something. He wasn't leading the conversation anymore. He was losing it. And worse? Clint Eastwood wasn't even trying that hard. Noah felt the heat rising in his face. His carefully planned takedown was crumbling, and Clint Eastwood hadn't even broken a sweat. The audience wasn't nodding along anymore. They were watching him squirm. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to sound composed, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "All right," Noah said, grasping for something to regain control. "Maybe you had some struggles, but don't you think there's a reason audiences are moving on? Hollywood is evolving. People don't want outdated perspectives shoved down their throats anymore." Eastwood let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. "Left behind?" he repeated. "Son, I've outlived entire Hollywood trends, been written off more times than I can count. And yet, here I am. And here you are, at my panel, using my name to try and make a headline." A few students in the audience muttered, "Damn." Noah felt his stomach tighten. That line had hit harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to fire back but hesitated. His mind was blank. For the first time, he wasn't sure what to say. Eastwood leaned back in his chair, giving him a look that said, "Go on, say something that matters." But Noah had nothing, because he had spent all his energy tearing something down without ever learning how to build. The weight of that realization hit him like a gut punch, and in the silence that followed, he knew. He had lost. The auditorium was silent, the weight of Eastwood's words settling over the crowd like a heavy curtain. Noah Parker stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, but there was nothing left to say. The confrontation he had carefully planned, the moment he believed would elevate his name in industry circles, had backfired spectacularly. He had walked into this exchange believing he would tear down a Hollywood relic, exposing an outdated filmmaker in front of a modern audience. Instead, he had been the one exposed, not for his boldness, but for his lack of depth, his shallow understanding of the very industry he claimed to challenge. A few chuckles broke the heavy silence, followed by scattered applause, not for Noah but for the effortless way Eastwood had dismantled him. Some students exchanged smirks, shaking their heads at Noah's overconfidence, while others, like Marcus Reed, a fellow aspiring filmmaker, sat quietly, absorbing the lesson that had just unfolded before them. This wasn't about generations or ideologies. It was about wisdom versus arrogance, experience versus assumption. Sensing the tension in the room, Dr. Evelyn Carter cleared her throat, attempting to steer the discussion back on track. "Well," she said with a forced smile, "that was certainly an interesting debate." But the energy in the room had already shifted. Marcus leaned toward Noah and muttered under his breath, "Man, you really thought you had him?" Noah didn't respond. Across the room, David Langley, the veteran film critic, gave Eastwood a subtle nod of respect. This wasn't just an aging filmmaker clinging to relevance. This was a man who had survived Hollywood's most ruthless cycles, outlasting trends, controversy, and reinvention. Meanwhile, Eastwood remained completely unfazed. He had nothing to prove, nothing to defend. He simply picked up his water bottle, took a slow sip, and let the moment pass, as if nothing had. And yet, everyone in the room knew something had happened. And Noah Parker would never forget it. As the panel discussion continued, Noah Parker sat back in his chair, quieter than before. The fire that had driven him to challenge Clint Eastwood had burned out, replaced by the quiet sting of defeat. He had come expecting to expose a relic of the past, but instead, he had been taught a lesson in resilience, wisdom, and the true nature of storytelling. Across the room, other students took note. Some, like Marcus Reed, now saw Eastwood not as an outdated filmmaker but as a master of his craft, someone who had adapted, endured, and outlasted Hollywood's changing tides. Even the most skeptical attendees couldn't deny that experience had won the day. As the event wrapped up, Noah didn't wait to network or shake hands. He slipped out of the auditorium unnoticed, his confidence shaken. He had spent years critiquing and dismissing the past, but tonight he had learned a hard truth. Tearing something down is easy. Building something meaningful is what really matters. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood simply stood, stretched, and turned to shake hands with a young director who had been waiting patiently to ask him a real question, not about the past, but about the future. The confrontation between Noah Parker and Clint Eastwood wasn't just a clash of generations. It was a lesson in wisdom, experience, and the difference between tearing something down and building something meaningful. Noah walked into that panel believing he could expose Eastwood as an outdated relic, someone whose time in Hollywood had passed. But instead he learned that longevity isn't accidental. It's earned through resilience, adaptation, and a deep understanding of one's craft. Eastwood's response wasn't just about defending himself. It was about challenging a mindset that assumes the past has no value. He demonstrated that real progress isn't about erasing history, it's about learning from it, improving upon it, and respecting those who paved the way. Noah, who was so focused on making a viral moment, failed to realize that true influence doesn't come from calling others out, it comes from having something worth saying. The lesson? Confidence without depth is empty. Criticism is easy, but creating something that stands the test of time requires more than just bold words. It requires skill, perseverance, and an understanding that success isn't handed out, it's earned. In the end, Noah wasn't just defeated, he was taught a lesson he wouldn't soon forget.